Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This week's questions answer video. What are some firearms myths you just want to see die? All of them. I want to see all of them die horrible deaths. I see them pop up quite frequently. And there's a lot of myths out there. Sometimes somebody says something and I'm like, I've never heard that before, but that's wrong. And spending 5 seconds on Google or asking some people who may be more knowledgeable than you would prove you that it's wrong. Biggest problem with myths is we have a cognitive bias. Sometimes we want to believe the source of the information so much that when someone corrects the information and we have a higher opinion of the source than we do of that person, or we don't know the person and we know the source, we tend to not want to believe them. I've seen this in cases with stolen valor, where a guy gets outed as lying about his military background, such as he was a SEAL or Ranger or a Sniper Delta SEAL or whatever, and he still has people that refuse to admit that their idol, if you will, was in fact not what he said he was, and they'll just go to ground defending the guy until finally they both fade away to obscurity. Firearms myths are no different. Sometimes we want to believe things because it reinforces the choices that we've made in our life. And I know this, maybe the guy asked this question wanting it to be a fun little video, but this is kind of serious stuff. Some of these myths can be pretty dangerous towards your mindset, or just pretty dangerous in general towards the way that you might approach a situation where you need to use a firearm. Myth number one, stopping power. Oh my God, does this get brought up repeatedly over and over and over again? Guys that wave the 45 ACP flag, especially some of the older gentlemen who just haven't continued to educate themselves, may fall victim to this myth and the fact that the slightly larger nature of their bullet of choice, subsonic, supersonic, irrelevant, is going to knock their threat down. It's going to provide stopping power. The problem with the phrase stopping power is it implies that there's some kind of measurable metric in a bullet's ability to stop a human being. Well, when you look at the medical aspect of things, there are no guaranteed time limits or time constraints based on rounds impacting the anatomy, even when they hit very critical regions of the body. It takes a variable amount of time based on conditions, heart rate, body size, blood loss, attempts to stop blood loss, so on and so forth. The only off switch in the human body is the central nervous system, which with a handgun at least would be most likely reached with a round delivery to the brainstem, the pons, the midbrain, the medulla oblongata, which would induce flaccid paralysis and result in an instant stop. Outside of that, everything starts a timer. So stopping power is a metric that can't be proven. It's a metric that can't be measured. That's why we shoot a lot to the very critical region of the body. We keep shooting until we've stopped the threat. Knockdown power is another way stopping power is said, which implies that the bullet itself will knock a person down, which is something we see in movies all the time because it makes for good TV. It makes for good movie. However, it doesn't exist in reality at all with small arms. A 9mm round of its own properties does not deliver enough energy to the target to knock it over. It's just not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because it's a law. It's a law of physics. It's not a suggestion. There's an equal and opposite reaction. So the force that the round would be delivered with is also the same force that's provided in recoil, which means if the bullet would knock the person down, the recoil would knock you down. And since that doesn't happen, and I know introducing a little recoil spring into the gun isn't going to cause that to be different if that were the case. So that's probably my number one myth that I would just like to see deleted from our collective knowledge altogether. If you shoot someone in the head, you are going to prison. Now, you kind of got to bear with me on this one because I got to try to understand the thought process of the people who think this way. The first thing I make a safe assumption about is the fact that they don't have a really strong understanding of how the legal system works. Due process and things of that nature aren't really on their radar or inside their wheelhouse when they make statements like this. And it's a very declarative statement. If you shoot a guy in the face, you're going to prison. And that's probably one of the dumbest things that you can say, and it's advice that you shouldn't be giving other people. If lethal force is justified, then lethal force is justified. There's lethal force against the human body. The law doesn't necessarily care where that force is delivered from a legal standpoint, as long as the force is justified. So yes, you can shoot people in the face. It also happens to be the most efficient way to stop them. No, you're not trying to kill them. However, it's not really your decision that very critical parts necessary for life function were placed inside the cranial vault skull. So it's perfectly okay to shoot a guy in the face if that's the best place to shoot him or the only place you have available to shoot him. And I'm not even going to get into the whole thing that like headshots are hard to get, because they are or they're not based on the context of the situation you're in. People have purposely shot people in the head in the past, and they'll continue to do so because it's actually a really good place to shoot someone if you want to stop a threat. Due to the litigious nature of our society, when we talk civil law versus criminal law, we try to avoid having conversations about bullets being killy. We talk about them being incapacitory in nature, so we want to incapacitate the threat. Although there's no specific criminal law that says you can't actually say shoot to kill. It's just not really smart to do based on, again, the litigious nature of our society. Yes, you can shoot people in the face. If you have the right to use lethal force, then you have the right to use lethal force to the face, which is on the outside of the head, which is very helpful. There are specific parts you'd want to shoot to, but again, we're not talking about that. I've addressed that in previous videos. So I don't have to be a lawyer to understand the plain language of the use of lethal force as far as where I live and the other states that I teach in. No one's ever spoke to, you can't shoot someone here, but you can shoot them there. To the best of my knowledge, that's not a thing. Now, can you face a steeper uphill battle if you do happen to go to a jury trial and they feel like you used excessive force to stop the threat? Yeah, shooting a guy and then throw him in a wood chipper is probably not going to go too good for you. But shooting to save your life, that's a very real thing. It happens quite a bit. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get in trouble for it. And if you do happen to go to a criminal or a civil trial, you can, I don't know, take the time to defend yourself by helping your attorney if he doesn't understand why you purposely targeted the regions of the body you did based on your personal training, practice, and experience. Let's not put the cart in front of the horse here. First step is self-defense. Everything else comes after that. So if I'm going to limit my ability to defend my life or the lives of my loved ones based on some myth that I read on some internet forum, I'm kind of stacking the deck in the wrong way. I'm not maximizing my chances of winning and survivability. I'm maximizing my chances of litigation if I survive based on the small parameter I've placed myself in. So it's pretty foolish to presuppose that these things are going to occur without doing any research of your own. Again, there's all kinds of dudes out there that are legal, well, they're lawyers, and they involve themselves in the firearms and the shooting and the self-defense community that you can ask these questions to. You don't just have to take what some guy, literally like Boston Beans 43 on frickin' pistol forums or something like that, said it and you're like, oh, that's gospel. You don't even know this guy. And even if you do know this guy, what is he basing that on? Sometimes you got to ask people to substantiate their accusations. So yeah, that's probably a myth that I would like to see gone. And of course, we're never going to totally get rid of it. But I do think we are becoming a little bit smarter as a shooting community because you definitely don't see that pop up as much anymore. Well, the Israelis do this. Cool. It's super good for them. What context does that have for your life? Carrying on an empty chamber is one that comes up. You should carry on an empty chamber because it's safe. If you're not comfortable or confident in your ability to handle a firearm that has built-in safety features with a round chambered, then maybe you should take some time to get some training and some practice. There are parts of the Israeli military where they do carry on an empty chamber, at least to the best of my knowledge currently. It's not military law enforcement wide over there. It's for people who carry a handgun as a secondary weapon system, working crowd control, something like that. They're worried about their secondary weapon system being taken and used against them. So carrying on an empty chamber was a solution they came up with. It is definitely not the fastest way or the safest way to carry a firearm. The safest way to carry a firearm is with a round chambered. And I know that might be counterintuitive to some people, but think about this. The firearm's main purpose is my safety. So the safest way I can be is to have a round in the chamber so it's immediately accessible for use in a self-defense situation. What are the chances I'm going to need to do a quick draw? Well, that goes back to kind of the cognitive dissonance that we have in the shooting community. We love to see guys do, you know, sub-second draws on targets at 2 foot to dubstep, but they're drawing with a round chambered from an appendix carry position on a firearm that doesn't have an active safety most likely. So that's like, whoa. But at the same time, like, that's cool to watch, but when I go home, I'm not going to carry a round in the chamber of my XD or my Beretta or my Taurus or whatever my personal carry gun is. Kind of silly. The thing about the Israelis is there was a time when they were getting a lot more real life reps than we in the US were. You think about pre-9/11, they were the ones who were constantly putting in work. Well, we went to war for almost 2 decades. And at least from the military aspect of things, we've got a lot of lessons learned from our conflicts and the way that the Americans fight that the Israelis are taking now from us. And again, that gets into the which military is better argument, and that's just like arguing AK versus AR or 9mm versus 45. It's kind of a nonsensical, cyclical argument that we don't really want to get into. But my bottom line point is, think about things critically. Does it make sense to carry with an empty chamber? Is there a law that says I have to? Okay, if I do carry with an empty chamber, how fast and proficient can I rack the gun and then get it into service to defend myself based on a spontaneous attack or based on a judgment situation where maybe I'm going to use verbal commands or something like that? Can you be successful despite yourself? Yes. If you carry a firearm with a round not in the chamber, you can still end up being successful in a self-defense situation. That doesn't mean you're right. It means you were successful despite your best efforts to fail. Optics on handguns are not good for concealed carry. We're going to be seeing this one for the next 10 years, maybe more, easy, because the same argument was had when we started putting red dots on rifles. And I've addressed this at length in other videos, so I'm not going to go too far into it here, just to say the fact that, like, from a physiological standpoint, the red dot is advantageous to iron sights. And the argument that iron sights work just well, it doesn't really fly. Because there's no evidence to that fact. If you look at and I'm going to use law enforcement example because that's where our most reliable sources of data come from, you'd be hard pressed to find a police department in a major metropolitan area in the United States that have hit percentages when their officers do get into shootings that are in the double digits. And if they are in the double digits, they're in the low teens to low 20s. That's not good. That's not, well, it's always worked. No, it hasn't been working. And of course, some of that is training, but some of it is the equipment, and some of it is the situation in general. So there's a lot of outside forces that are uncontrollable, but the one thing that is controllable is the way we train people, the way that we practice, and the technology that we can use to be more advantageous. You should be able to shoot without a red dot on a handgun. I get that. You should be able to use iron sights. Totally get that too. But if the technology exists and the technology is reliable and it's going to make you a better, more efficient shooter, why wouldn't you use it? It doesn't really make sense to me. If you look at the evolution of sighting systems, especially in regards to handguns, because that's what we're talking about, night sights. Night sights have been in use, popular in use for a couple of decades now, late 70s-ish on, some earlier than that, but I mean widespread adoption. But the shooting efficiency didn't go up. If you look, and Thomas Avini with the Police Council did a really great study on this. He looked at 4 different metropolitan police departments and went all the way back. NYPD's been keeping statistics on their shootings since the late 1800s. And every police department collects data a little different, but with his study, he basically said that, you know, the vast majority of law enforcement shootings happen in lower light or darkness conditions, but the introduction of night sights into police work and onto police duty weapons did not improve accuracy. It's almost like they don't work as well as we think they do. And people who think they work really well may not have applied them to a shooting situation in which the night sight would actually either show its benefit or show its negatives. Should you take your night sights off your gun? No, but it didn't fix a problem we were having. So the next technological jump we've made is miniaturizing red dots and putting them in our handgun. The clear advantage is one focal plane shooting, we can stay threat focused, and they work regardless of lighting condition as long as you have a quality red dot and a good light source such as a weapon light or a good handheld light. That's all the myths I'm really going to hit for now. I'm sure I will address others later just because I like to talk and be very specific, and because I speak in paragraph form, these videos will end up being an hour long, and we don't want that. A good 20 minutes or shorter is always good. So I will definitely address more myths in the future. Anytime I see one, I'm going to go ahead and jot it down, or if someone asks me specifically a question, I'll go ahead and get a collection of 4 or 5 of them, and I'll do another video on it. Until then, I'm Aaron Calvin with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.